Welcome to Living Well with MS, the podcast from Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity, celebrating its 10th year of serving the MS community. I'm your host, Geoff Alex. The goal of our organisation and this podcast is to inform, support and empower people with MS to lead full and happy lives. We're excited you could join us for this new episode. Make sure to check out this episode's show notes for more information and useful links. You can find these on our website at overcomingms.org/podcast or on whichever podcast platform you use to tune into our programme. If you enjoy the show, please spread the word about us on your social media channels or leave a review wherever you tune into our podcast. Have questions or ideas to share? Email us at podcast@overcomingms.org, or you can reach out to me directly on Twitter at Geoff Alex. We'd love to hear from you. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to Living Well with MS on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And now, let's meet our guest for this episode. In today's Living Well with MS podcast, we have an interview with Arlene Faulk. Arlene Faulk has had a passion for writing from a young age, beginning in the 8th grade when she wrote and published her class newsletter, The Tatler. She earned a BA in journalism from the University of Iowa, reporting on everything from Led Zeppelin concerts to protests of the Vietnam War. She went on to receive an MA in speech communication from the University of Kansas. At 22 years old, Arlene lost all feeling below her waist. She regained mobility, but it was years before she received an accurate diagnosis of MS. Arlene endured years of undiagnosed chronic pain, concealing her debilitating symptoms while climbing the corporate ladder, where she managed human resources departments in a major airline until her body stopped her. In her illuminating journey of determination and self-discovery, she explores how practicing Tai Chi and modifying her lifestyle and mindset helped her retake control and move her life in the direction of possibility. She has been teaching Tai Chi for over 20 years in Chicago and Evanston, Illinois. Welcome to the programme, Arlene, and thanks so much for joining us on Living Well with MS.
So glad to be with you today. Thanks for asking me.
And congratulations on the recent release of your book, Walking on Pins and Needles. It's all about how you discovered how Tai Chi can help people, yourself included, manage chronic pain. And we'll get more into that shortly. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about your background. So you were diagnosed with MS in your early 20s, which then spiraled into a series of debilitating symptoms and pain as well. So could you tell us a little bit about your initial experiences of coping with the realities of having MS?
Sure. Actually, it was in 1970. So a while back, I had just graduated from college, university, and was in my first job as a management trainee. So very excited, very busy. And one afternoon, I lost all the feeling from my waist down. So that was pretty scary. And there was no diagnosis. It was inconclusive. Went away. I was young. I kept going. And then it was some years later that the symptoms returned and it progressively got worse. I lost my ability to walk. I was having a lot of pain and still did not have a specific diagnosis. Just for your listeners who might not have been around at that period of time, there was, at least in our country, the MRI was not a common test. So there were CAT scans, there were spinal tap. It was 21 years after that first episode of losing my feeling from the waist down that I got an official diagnosis of MS, and that's when I had the MRI. So without going through the specifics in terms of all that happened between the time it first occurred and then when I got the diagnosis, it was basically a series of fatigue, of losing my balance, not knowing if I could get across the street, pain. I felt that my legs felt like they had needles just plugged into it. It's really like being plugged into a socket, electric socket is what it felt like sometimes. Then my arms would feel like needles, just very sharp, prickly kind of pain. So it was scary, but I kept on going. I just thought it was mind over matter, and I would figure out what it was. And as long as I could keep going, I would do that. And I was ascending the career ladder in a major corporation and was able to continue to do that until one day my body stopped me. And it stopped me completely, said, no more. and I laid on my couch for 2 years.
So, yeah, so you went on to have a successful corporate career, but how did you deal with the stress of the high pressure, or is that what ultimately stopped you, do you think?
It's a very good question. I just kept barreling through it. I think I have a pretty high tolerance for stress, and well, I thought so, higher than we all have our limitations, and we have to listen to our body, because if we don't, our body will stop us. I thought I was listening to my body. I exercised, I walked, I went to a gym, so I thought I was doing it, but I really didn't learn until later that I was not really listening to my body until it stopped me. So that's what I did. I did social things. I went to the gym. In terms of doing exercise, I did do that. I thought that was relieving the stress, as well as social kinds of functions. As far as figuring out what was going on, I sort of at times pushed that to the side and said, well, they can't figure out, the doctors can't figure out what is really going on, and I don't know. So I'll have to keep going until they can figure it out. There was a lot of frustration because didn't know what it was, and it became scarier and scarier because the symptoms started getting worse and worse in terms of, I was living in New York City and didn't know if I could cross the street, and all the traffic and busyness there. And so I thought, I have got to find out what this is. And I had a good team of doctors. They thought it was neurological, thought it might be MS, but they didn't have the tools to say specifically that's what it was. They treated me as though it was MS. At the time, the best treatment was oral prednisone. There was no injectionable drugs at the time, so it was really oral prednisone that I had lots of doses of that over the years.
And that's a steroid, isn't it?
Yes, it is a steroid.
So it's a short-term treatment to get you through a relapse.
It's a short-term treatment. Yeah. Yes, and then when the times when I was very close to losing my balance and losing my ability to walk, which I did 3 times, completely lost it, I would go into the hospital and they do an intravenous treatment that also was a steroid, a stronger kind of steroid, for 3 days, and then hopefully it would stop the inflammation. And it did. I think in every case it stopped it, but then I felt all drugged, and I for many years did feel sort of foggy and drugged, and it took a while then for that to decrease and my symptoms to decrease. It didn't make it better. It just stopped the progression. Is what it did.
So you're sort of, well, the core reason we've got you on talking to us is about Tai Chi. So could you say a bit about when you discovered Tai Chi and tell, I mean, listeners might not be familiar with what Tai Chi is. So could you describe it and your discovery of Tai Chi?
Sure. I will describe it. I mentioned that I was on my couch for 2 years, not knowing what to do. And all of my leadership skills, decision-making that had served me so well weren't working. I couldn't figure out what to do. Through a series of events, I was led to a healer, a practitioner of Chinese medicine who's an acupuncturist, and I started seeing her. Did not know what I was doing or what it was really about, but I thought, okay, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to try it. And had success with her. She cared a lot. I really felt that she might be able to help me. And she was the one who recommended Tai Chi. So when I started Tai Chi, I started with a group of seniors. I thought, well, why not? What I knew about it was from China, and it was developed as a martial art. So I started, and for the first year and a half, I sat in a chair, and I did the breathing. I did a lot of visualization in terms of the moves of what they were doing. And in each class, the teacher had the students do a Tai Chi walk, where you focus on the standing leg. You pick up the leg and you set it down, and we call it being rooted into the ground. So the middle of the foot is rooted, and you can focus then on your alignment. And then you pick up the other leg and set it down. So it's an up and down motion. You go forward a little bit, but it's more up and down. So what Tai Chi does, just in general, overall principles, it looks to people like it's a dance. When people see in the park, see people doing it, and it's very beautiful in terms of flowing and beautiful. what it is the focusing on the moment. There are weight shifts, 3 major weight shifts, and turning from the waist and the hips. The arms will follow, keeping the body together as much as possible as a single unit, working in harmony together. That helps you focus on the moment. When you focus on the moment, then it helps relax. It helps stress go away because you can't be thinking about other things. So that's one of the things that even helping me with my MS and my own story forward. That was one of the things that Tai Chi did, because the fear, the uncertainty, the pain can be hard to deal with. And sometimes it's easy just to focus on those things. So I really wanted to get out of that kind of mode and do something positive. For a while, I didn't know if it was doing anything. I thought, okay, I'm gonna keep doing it, and I did. And slowly, I regained my ability to walk. I owe that and attribute that to Tai Chi in terms of my walking. And in my classes today, I do walking. Have the students do walking in every class because I know how helpful it is, regardless of where your starting point is. And then focus on the principles of being what we call, again, rooted like a tree, nice alignment, and moving the body in preset sequence of movements to balance. It's called balancing our yin and yang. And Tai Chi is based on the fundamental principles of nature, that everything relates to each other, and it's in harmony and it's in flow. And that's what Tai Chi is. And some of the names of the moves in Tai Chi are named after animals or water or mountains, to really reinforce that point.
And you can literally go from starting with a seated. If you're not able to walk, you were literally going from you started in a seated pose and then getting ultimately to the point where now you can walk. I know. Yes.
That's why, and I have taught people in chairs classes where everybody's in chair, and I've taught mixed classes. And what I say is to visualize, because I had it happen myself, that you're around this nice energy. It is a very good flowing kind of energy that's relaxing. And then if you visualize your foot taking a step, whether it is or not, or bending at the ankle, whether you can or not, then over time, for me, I was able to do it. Now, I can only tell my story, but I have taught others that have made progress from where they are in somewhat the same way that I have.
And would you say that mindfulness is a core component as well? You mentioned that you're in the moment, you're concentrating on what you're doing.
Mindfulness is a huge component. In fact, Tai Chi is often called mindfulness in motion. So you think about it, and people are familiar and do yoga, which is another excellent internal energy discipline. It's really creates stillness through stillness and poses. What Tai Chi does is create stillness through motion. So you'll hear mindfulness in motion, and sometimes medication in motion, because it can be a medication and for people in and of itself. So it is a key component.
It also came up about our mindsets compelling us to try and control things as much as we can. And there's also an element that we need to let go, which might be a healthier path. Now, there's 2 things that occurred to me when this question came up. Because partly, I think, some of the people who are doing better with MS are ones who've decided to do something themselves, to not be someone that things are done to, so that they would just receive whatever the neurologist tells them. They'll take that drug and it is what it is, and they will just carry on with their life, and then they'll just do what they're told. I think to me, for the number of people I've spoken to, people who are proactive in their journey, and they say, no, I will actually do something, which may be taking up Tai Chi, it might be taking up yoga, it might be eating a more whole food-based diet, doing more mindfulness. That actually those people who are more proactive tend to do better in from what I've found, just personal experience. So there's sort of 2 sides to this. There's controlling as much as we can, which I think it could be a positive in that we're actually proactive, but equally maybe we take that too far and then we're trying to control our lives. I mean, you mentioned the start of your condition that you were just sort of trying to push through this, and I can understand that. Before I was diagnosed, I would traditionally, I did a lot of sport, and I would just train harder. You know, I can't do this rock climb. I need to train harder to do that rock climb. I can't run fast enough. I need to do a bit more running. And suddenly it wasn't working because I was tripping still, and I was going to still and I was thinking, well, I need to run more then. To stop tripping when I run, I need to run more, and that wasn't working at all, and that was alien to me. That never happened in my life, so that clearly that way of doing things wasn't working. So how do you make that lane change to say that actually we need to let go of that, and can Tai Chi help with that shift in a way of thinking?
It's an excellent question, because I think a lot of us do what you're talking about. I certainly did, in terms of trying harder. If it worked before, why isn't it working if I just do more of it? So it's a huge shift, and it starts with a mental shift of I really can't control everything. It's a realization that it's not that we don't have any control, because we can do some things to help ourselves, but it is, the things are going to happen, and life happens. And letting go is a major part of Tai Chi. Letting go of tension, letting go of preconceived ideas, and that has to do with first learning to be in the moment. So I really did make a huge shift from living from my head, pushing through, to living in my body in terms of letting go. And that is a main principle of Tai Chi. We have to keep working at it, because our mind will drift towards this to do or this worry. And so fear can creep in, and it is a matter of focusing on this breath or this particular move. We have a move called part the wild horse's mane. And I tell my students in class, if part the wild horse's mane is the best thing you've learned today, isn't that wonderful? It's wonderful. You don't have any preconceived ideas of what that should be, because you don't know. And so Tai Chi is really nice that way, to have terms that we don't use in regular life, and in a regular day-to-day life, I should say. And it is energy, learning to relax the muscles, relax the mind, and move the energy through our body. And you can feel that individually as well as feel that in a class. I'm still doing some teaching online since COVID. And I can feel the energy coming through the screen sometimes. I tell my students that when we're doing it together, that really can happen. And I start, before even my prologue starts in my book, I use a quote by an ancient Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, that says, when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. And that's sort of my journey. And I think maybe many people's journey, whether they're in that right now, is that there's fear of the unknown. And what I've learned by letting go is that's where the possibilities are, in the unknown. When I jumped into work with Nancy, is her name, the acupuncturist, I was fearful. I didn't know what it was. I had no experience. And I did it anyway. So sometimes we have to do that with good sense and good recommendation. I think that's probably important also. But we've got to try. And I think that we fear the uncertainty, and particularly those are principles with MS and any kind of chronic pain that people deal with. There can be a tendency to say, well, I just can't do it, or I don't feel like it. And taking that step forward, taking one step forward, regardless of what it is, not just thinking about it, but actually taking a step forward, even in the midst of uncertainty and even in the midst of pain. I see others doing that. Not only MS, but in arthritis, both osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, lupus come to my mind. Even I have a man right now who's dealing with spinal stenosis. He was not sure about Tai Chi, and he's been doing it about 8 weeks, and he said he feels pressure off his spine doing the Tai Chi moves. And he does some of it sitting down and some of it standing.
So yeah, that's very, and I think that idea that you're being proactive in your wellness, but then not, you're also being accepting. So you can be both. You can be
Yeah, you
accepting
can
of
be
what's going
both.
on, but you can also be proactive and do something about your wellness. Uh,
Right. I don't think it's an either or. It's not an
no,
either or.
no. They sound similar, but they're not. No, it's not. So when did you move into teaching Tai Chi, and how have you developed that approach to tackling chronic pain?
When I started teaching Tai Chi, I had been studying it maybe five years. And usually with people starting to teach, it's a lot longer practice than before they start teaching. But the acupuncturist was going to open a new holistic health center and said, I want you to teach here. And I said, I'm not sure that I'm ready. I'll ask my teacher. And he said, no, I want your energy here. And I did it and started. So the teaching of the principles, you have to take it up another level when you're teaching others, because you have to explain it in terms that they might understand, and they don't always understand. Like I didn't understand when I first started. You said, okay, we'll relax with it and give it time and you will understand. And you don't always have to understand in your head. Your body might pick it up before your head does. And then it's been helpful. And to this day, I don't have the chronic pain now, but if I do have some pain, Tai Chi is the most helpful thing to me. There's something about the motion and the movement that I can put myself in that moment, and the movement itself. There's something that really speaks to my body after all these years that is still helpful. So that's basically it. And other people are at different points, and I have seen some remarkable stories of people. I have a lot of people who do have chronic pain situations, and so I give it to them for trying, and we can always adapt. I always say when we start, the main thing is showing up. It's like what you were talking about before in terms of it's not an either or, but being proactive. I think even with the pain and not knowing what to do, it can be difficult. Days can be hard. And so taking a step forward to do something, saying that you deserve to do something, that it might make a difference, is really the first step. And it can be a really long line and space between thinking you should do something and actually doing it. I might have mentioned that similarly before, but that taking one step, people feel so good about themselves, say, I did it, showing up. So I reinforce people for showing up.
Yeah, I think I've heard that from other people. That just taking, you don't have to run a marathon. If you can walk to the end of the street, or if you can walk to the end of your drive, if you take one more step, then you got a bit further than you did yesterday. And if the next day you get another step, that first step, that's the start of the path. That's
yes.
Each time you get a little bit further, and at the end of that path, you can be, you can do great things. But all of those things started with one step.
They start with one step. I have a woman who contacted me. She was interested in Tai Chi. She has a degenerative health condition, and they haven't diagnosed what it is, but she's losing not only muscle tone, but muscle strength. And it's scary to her. She's been very active and not only walking, but in sports. And so it feels like her livelihood is slowly being taken away from her. So she was asking about Tai Chi. She's not able to do a class right now, but I told her about, on YouTube, I do have some videos that if she sat in a chair, and maybe that would be helpful. And I talked to her. She actually contacted me and she said, I want to tell you how excited I am. I went from being able to do one of your videos from 2 minutes to 5 minutes. She said, I haven't felt this good in a long time. That I mentioned that because that's huge. To some people, that might not seem like a lot, but I give her all the credit in the world because she's doing something. And it's helping her, and she's excited about it.
Yeah, and I think you need to reset as well, because I sometimes think, like, I'm not going to do the things that I did 20 years ago. That's not an achievable goal. I just need, actually, if I can, if I can walk for 2 miles, then that would be an achievement. not running 26 miles. If I set that as a target, that's something I did before. That was a different time. So me without MS and me with MS are different people. And I think you can't, again, someone said this to me, you can't judge yourself on what you used to do. That was a different person. So you with MS, there's achievements now that would have been nothing to you before, but they are still an achievement now. And getting a bit better now is a positive thing. So you don't judge yourself what you could do before.
Exactly. And not to judge yourself. And you're not a lesser person now than you were then because you can't run your 26 miles. It's not, some people might compare themselves to, oh, I can't do that and I can't do that. And we don't want to get into that mindset. It is look at what you can do where you are now, given your state of life and what's been thrown your way.
Yeah.
We all have things thrown our way that we don't expect.
And we mentioned earlier on, right at the beginning, that you've got a book. So you've gone on to write a book about Tai Chi, and there is information about the book and where you purchased it and so on in the show notes. So have a look in the show notes. But how did it come about writing a book?
Excellent question. And the main thing I can say is that my Tai Chi students were the ones who really encouraged me to write a book. I'm one who has kept some diaries. I've kept some notes. Certainly when I was first seeing an acupuncturist, I'd come home and I'd write down what she said because I really didn't understand when she said, really listen to your body. You got to start letting go. You have to take your body with you, what all those things meant. So students would say, I've been thinking about taking a class. I've been thinking about doing this for a long time. Your story was very inspiring to me, and it got me to the point that I actually did something. You should write it to others. Write it for others, excuse me. So my hope in writing the book is that it will inspire people to take one step, to say, maybe I can do something that's really going to be good for my health, regardless what their situation is. It doesn't have to be MS. It can. We all have things that can we could do to help improve our life. But so many people think about it and don't do anything about it and lose momentum. So hopefully my story is inspiring and the perseverance. And I did have a discipline in moving through what I moved through. And yet anybody can take from where they are right now and make a step to start to improve. It could be exercise. I think that is important of some kind. Diet, you mentioned those earlier in terms of improvements in diet, different parts of our life that really could help make our health and our daily life more pleasant.
Yeah, and I think as well, a lot of these things, people don't necessarily get told about them by their healthcare professionals because they're very much connected with what medication you should be taking. But I think as well, it's not rocket science. It's if you eat a healthy diet, which people know what a healthy diet is. I mean, we sort of talk about levels of saturated fats and we talk about processing, and it's like most people know what's healthy. You know that your parents told you 30 years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah, eat your fruit and vegetables.
Eat your fruit and vegetables, right? So,
yeah. That massively processed candy bar is not health food. I think everyone knows this. They know it themselves. They know that if they do a bit of exercise, that's good for them. They know that if they're not too stressed, that's good for them. I think it's it may not be our healthcare providers that are putting it front and center, but I think a lot of these things are fairly obvious as well. But I would like to ask you a question that we ask most people in some form or other, and which is that if you were to distill your experience specifically for you with Tai Chi into a few core lessons that you've learned that you give to our community of people with MS and the supporters of those people, what would that be? What would be the lesson or lessons that you would say would be a core thing to take away?
Okay. The first thing that comes to my mind is focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. And you might make that a mantra for each day, or put it up on your refrigerator, or put it on your desk, because it's easy to forget. Not just to forget, but not believe it from day to day. So that is what we can do rather than what we can't do. think about somebody. It could be a family member. It could be a professional. It could be a friend who can be a cheerleader and support for you. That if you take a step and it's scary, that they'll be there to say, keep going, keep going. I think that support, for me, it was a woman named Nancy, who was my acupuncturist. I talked about her as being a cheerleader for my body. I think that's really important. The third thing I would say is to take a step forward, even if it's very small, and work on not being so hard on yourself. That it's okay if it's a small step, and victories come in little packages, and they can be monumental. And the last thing I would say is breathe. When people ask me what's the one thing I could do that could really make a difference, I say breathing. And that sounds simple, but it's not. I even see that in class, and people will say that, oh, I'm glad you're reminding us to breathe because I'm concentrating, I'm not breathing. I mean intentional breathing. So that when we get stressed, even in pain, when there's fear, when there's anxiety, our shoulders tense up, the best thing we can do is breathe, intentionally breathing, to be in the moment and take deep breaths in and out. So I think that there are different, some apps out there that have, I looked at one at one point that had breathing. It was for, I think it had this big, looked like a sun ball that was yellow, looking like the sun. And it was to stop and breathe in for about 1 minute. So that, I would say, is important also.
I think I've seen that. It might be Fitbit or something like that.
I don't know what it's called. Yes,
I didn't
describe
gets
it very
bigger,
well.
doesn't it?
Yeah, the ball gets bigger.
And it gets
Yeah,
smaller when you breathe out. Yeah, I've seen that somewhere. So thank you very much for joining us on Living Well with MS, Arlene. So we're thrilled to learn about the amazing work you're doing to help ease chronic pain through your Tai Chi practice. And I would encourage everyone to learn more about it by checking out your book. And you can find all of the links to connect to you and about your book in the show notes for this episode. So thank you very much for joining us, Arlene.
Oh, thank you, Geoff. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find all sorts of useful links and bonus information there. Do you have questions about this episode or ideas about future ones? Email us at podcast@overcomingms.org. We'd love to hear from you. You can also subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Living Well with MS is kindly supported by a grant from the Happy Charitable Trust. If you'd like to support the Overcoming MS charity and help keep our podcast advertising free, you can donate online at overcomingms.org/donate. To learn more about Overcoming MS and its array of free content and programs, including webinars, recipes, exercise guides, OMS circles, our global network of community support groups, and more, please visit our website at overcomingms.org. While you're there, don't forget to register for our monthly e-newsletter so you can stay informed about the podcast and other news and updates from Overcoming MS. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you next time. The Living Well with MS family of podcasts is for private, non-commercial use and exists to educate and inspire our community of listeners. We do not offer medical advice. For medical advice, please contact your doctor or other licensed healthcare professional. Our guests are carefully selected, but all opinions they express are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Overcoming MS charity, its affiliates, or staff.